My name is Acting Staff Sergeant Ben Lawson, spelled Lawson, of the Calgary Police Service's Firearms Investigative Unit. We have laid 66 charges against 2 men believed to be running a firearms production and trafficking operation in Calgary. To date, in 2022, officers from across the service have seized 1,229 firearms, including 316 firearms determined to be crime guns. Of the crime guns seized this year, 9% are deemed to be homemade or 3D printed, which is a significant increase from previous years. 3D printed firearms are a growing trend that we are working to address through targeted enforcement. 3D printed guns function just like any other firearm and have the potential to cause real danger to our community. In November 2020, we became aware of an individual believed to be involved in the trafficking of firearms within Calgary. Upon further investigation, officers learned the suspect had recently purchased a 3D printer and believed the suspect was using the printer to manufacture firearms. After working to collect additional evidence in May 2022, search warrants were conducted at residences located in the communities of Dover and Seaton. As a result, we seized 3 3D printers, 5 complete 3D printed handguns and magazines, 5 partially printed handguns, as well as a small amount of drugs, ammunition, and other firearm assembly parts and tools. After further forensic examination by the CPS Forensic Firearms and Toolmark Lab, we were able to link this firearm manufacturing operation to a separate 3D printed firearm that was seized by CPS officers in May of 2022 as part of an unrelated investigation. Brandon Vincent Wagner has been charged with 38 firearms manufacturing, possession, and trafficking offenses, as well as 1 count of money laundering. Justin Kumar has been charged with 28 firearms trafficking and possession charges.
Any questions?
Do you have any data as to how many of these guns can be attributed to the 97 shootings this year?
Of the 316 crime guns to date that have been seized, we work continuously with the Firearms and Forensics Toolmark Lab, or the Forensic Firearms and Toolmark Lab, to identify which guns have been linked, and so that's an ongoing process. So to give you an accurate number, it's a continual and it's a long, arduous process that our scientists in our lab require to match those all up. Currently, we have, as of this week, we have sent out 23 summaries, and when I say a summary, that has been a link between multiple shootings. So some of those have 1 or 2 links, some of them have 3 or 4 linkages, and they, as you know from our current situation with the gun violence, there's linkages that are matching multiple shootings. So 23 incidences altogether have been summarized together through the work of all the different groups.
Talk about tracking. I mean, is there any way to tell when you're at a scene if the shell casing that you're looking at has come from a 3D gun?
No. The firearms, whether they're 3D printed, as I mentioned, these ones all function just like any other firearm. So there is no difference from the casing. The parts on the upper parts, the slide and the receiver, so the metal components of a 3D printed firearm, those will be the same as any other firearm, and they will leave the exact same forensics evidence as any other firearm that's used. So there's no difference at the scene to determine if it was a 3D printed gun or another firearm. What we can tell is the calibers and how many guns were used and that kind of thing, but that still takes a lot of work as well.
Any idea how many units like this there might be in the city?
So,
Common, do you think?
so what we've seen in Calgary, since our unit has been stood up since 2020, we've started tracking all our firearms, all our crime guns as well. So what we are seeing is a definite trend in the use of 3D printed firearms. So when we first started in 2020 and tracking this, we seized maybe 1 or 2 in the year. We are up to around 15 this year, so that increase has gone from about 1% up to about 9% of all crime guns seized in the city.
That's since 2020.
Since 2020, yes.
With the ban in handgun imports, is Calgary Police concerned that this trend will continue to grow, now that this ban is in place?
So what the Firearms Investigative Unit does is we track every crime gun and we try to figure out where the source of that firearm came from. So with that work and the ongoing collection of data and information that we have, we can then start to identify trends. And it's hard to speculate on any type of legislation until we actually are looking at the firearms and what we see. What I can tell you is we've obviously seen an increase in 3D printed and homemade firearms. We've also seen an increase in smuggling firearms. Those are the 2 trends that we've identified over the last 2 years.
These 3D printers, how easy are they to obtain for an everyday person? Are they
illegal to obtain online? And what goes into printing these weapons?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a 3D printer is legally purchased from anywhere, whether it be from Amazon or a local store. There's nothing illegal about a 3D printer and the filament that you also purchase. So those you can purchase quite readily. And then the actual printing of the receiver, so the lower part of a firearm, that is based off of a drawing that, whether it be from some computer program that they have or whatever. So basically you need the printer, the filament, and a computer in order to print anything that's 3D printed. And firearms are no different. And then you get it into the metal components, which then have to be purchased to complete the firearm.
How readily available would, like an open source document showing somebody how to create a gun, how readily available is that online? Is there any, ability to control the spread of those documents?
Yeah, so it's worldwide, to be completely honest. So we're looking at 3D printing in countries in Europe, to the US, to here. And so once they're just as readily available. They used to be all only on the dark web because it was more of a nefarious activity. And now in lots of countries where you can legally print your own private firearm that you can use yourself, which is illegal in Canada, it is becoming more prevalent to obtain those types of documents on the internet.
Does it make your job more difficult? Because you were saying the only part, the slide, the metal part, I mean, those are parts that have to be obtained by the guys making these guns here. How do you, like, the old school, like, tracking with serial numbers, like, does it make these guns harder to track if there's no serial, there's no, history where these guns are coming from?
Yeah, you bet. So you're referring to lots of terms are used, whether they're personally manufactured, ghost guns, Franken guns, whatever term you want to use. So lots of people refer to them as ghost guns. And so a ghost gun is a firearm that has never had a serial number, so it's not traceable. We have other types. So when I say 3D printed or homemade, that would include other firearms that are either homemade or ghost guns, untraceable. So there's never been a serial number associated to it. So this isn't the only means to obtain a ghost gun by 3D printing. There are other means, whether it be through other source countries or it be through taking gun parts all apart and literally manufacturing your own. We have seen, I believe, 2 that have been used through CNC machines. So basically the same way, but just using metal rather than plastic.
Do you know where the metal components are largely coming from? Like you say, are they being manufactured locally on CNC machines? Are these coming through the dark web or through mail or what?
The upper components can be purchased anywhere. The slide, barrel, internal parts can be purchased at any gun store, any online, those kinds of things. So there's no current regulations around those components. The part that is monitored, tracked, and registered for, especially for restricted firearms, is the lower part, which is serialized.
So is the criminal code up to speed on this new technology? Like, would CPS like to see maybe changes that they could allow you to better address this?
Here at CPS, we have a lot of resources to deal with a lot of different emerging trends. So I would say when it comes to legislation and criminal code and all those things, we use every tool in our toolbox to do that. So that's why here in Calgary, we have our own forensic firearms and toolmark lab that does a crazy amount of work both in shooting scenes as well as the functionality and the testing of firearms, as well as our forensic crime scenes unit that does a lot of work as well. So we just use the tools and the legislation that's at our disposal to identify all those different trends, as well as provide a good product for the courts to get successful charges and convictions on individuals.
Are these guns readily available? Are they easy to get?
Which guns are you referring to? These ones?
Well, the ones made by the 3D printers, obviously.
This activity of 3D printing firearms is highly illegal, so there is a definite underworld and a criminal element to it. So I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's definitely something that one of my teams, the Firearms Investigative team, is hard working at to identify offenders, purchase history, everything that we can to identify where this illegal part of the firearms in our community is happening.
Are these machines, do they have to have, are they specialized 3D machines that can make them, or any 3D printer?
These are your ordinary 3D printed machines that can print memorabilia, desk decals, or whatever. And just like anything else we see, whether it be drugs or firearms, there are legitimate reasons to having drugs, and there are illegitimate. This is the same thing about 3D printers, that there are legal lawful reasons to own one and use one, but there are also the criminal element that it can be used for as well.
What went into this investigation? Maybe just the length of the investigation and how you were able to track down these two homes and these weapons.
It took a collaborative effort amongst all different units and groups within the city. So we worked with everyone from our frontline patrol to our crime scenes unit to any other investigative area. It started by when the Firearms Investigative team started in April of 2020. That was the first time CPS had a dedicated firearms unit. So what we did is we began soliciting information from our other investigative units to drum up as much firearms information as we could, as far as who's involved in the picture in Calgary in the firearms, identifying targets, locations, trends. So we spent a lot of time that first year. So although this individual was identified early on as being part of that, it still took us some time to gather all the evidence in the grounds that then obviously ended up in having the search warrant and the successful charges laid at the end.
How scary is it though? I don't even know really what a real Glock looks like. So somebody maybe, scenario tries to rob a liquor store or something with one of these, like there's one with a blue handle, an orange or green. And the guy might think, well, that's just a fake gun. But now, obviously we now know that these guns aren't. Is that kind of there is kind of that element to these guns as well. They don't look real. It looks like something you buy off a toy shelf.
Yeah, it's a great question. So us in the Calgary Police Service and the Firearms Investigative Unit are quite concerned about all prevalence of firearms that are out there. It doesn't have to be deemed a real firearm to victimize someone in a robbery or in a holdup, or even to see something happening on the streets that could be a real gun, or it could be a water gun that's painted all black. The victimization is the same, and so that's concerning to us regardless of whether it's real or not. Then the realness of the firearm comes in afterwards when we do all the testing to see what kind of charges we can lay to make sure we're laying appropriate charges, giving proper court documentation for the courts for successful convictions. So all the ones that you see here, with the exception of the gray one in the middle, they're all seized from this operation. The one in the middle, as I mentioned, was seized on a drug trafficking investigation completely separate from ours, from an address downtown. And after we then seized all our evidence from our operation, we linked it back. So these firearms will shoot around no different than any other firearm. And they can be made to look differently as well. These handguns are typically used in Calgary in our shootings. So you'll see them look like this, and there is no way that a police officer will be able to identify the difference between a black painted water gun or pellet gun to one of these, the way that they're being made.
So,
Go ahead.
so regardless of the firearm ban that the federal government's brought in, these are going to continue to be here and be available.
Yeah, any comments on legislation or bans or anything that would be speculative. What we know is we can just use the tools that are in legislation and the criminal code and the Firearms Act regulation to target individuals that are involved in the criminal side of the firearms trade in our city. So we know that a criminal will attempt to get a firearm in their hands any method that they can, whether it be from 3D printed, whether it be from stolen, from a break and enter, whether it be from smuggled firearms. So I don't think we concern ourselves too much about that as far as identifying trends and making sure we're ahead of them or on top of them to then complete proper investigations, knowing where our firearms are coming from.
Give me an idea how much they would go for if someone was buying one?
Firearms in the black market range so much. It depends on the time of year. It depends on the quality of them. It depends on the group that you're in. So again, it'd be more speculative to say like they are worth this much money. It is a lucrative market, so what it costs to get this set up is rather inexpensive in compared to what you could sell a firearm on the black market. They can range anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 depending on the firearm, where they are located, and other jurisdictions have released different numbers on their firearms as far as their costs. So our costs in Calgary would be different than in Toronto or Vancouver, but that's the same as drugs. So it's just another commodity to these individuals involved in criminal organizations.
If I'm a resident in Calgary and I'm concerned that this might be going on in my neighborhood, can you maybe just give us some signs of perhaps like that you need to look out for if maybe this activity is going on?
Absolutely. appreciate the question. So we rely on, we don't know what we don't know. So we rely on the public to share information with us when they see anything. So it can be as much as something that just makes your hair stand on the back of your neck when a friend, a neighbor, a cousin, a son or daughter, anyone that is saying they're getting into 3D printing and they have friends around and you just you aren't sure what they're printing. You see here from the printers here, on the printers are 3 receivers that were mid-print when our members entered the residence to seize these firearms. So that is how they will look. So if it feels off and seems off, there's probably something there. So we ask that you either call the police, whether it be through Crime Stoppers, your community district, whatever the case may be, and share that information, because you don't know what small piece of information you have could be a small straw in some other major investigation that could help us conclude something a lot faster and keep the community safe a lot quicker. It also includes the hundreds of thousands of lawful gun owners out there too. We, just as much as they want to protect what their livelihoods, so we ask that they provide us information if they see things that are clearly nefarious in nature as well.
I'm just curious how long one of these, I don't know if you have an answer, but how long one of these machines takes to print one of these weapons? Like how many guns could be printed in, say, a week on one machine?
Oh, you're asking me to do math? One of these receivers will take roughly about 36 hours to print on one printer. The printers take calibration and time to kind of figure out, so it also depends on the skill level of the individual printing it, but a printer would take anywhere between 30 and 40 hours to print a receiver.
The metal upper part, just to clarify, can anyone go into a gun retailer and purchase the upper part? Does that have a serial number? Do you need a FAC to purchase that part?
So right now we're working hard with the Alberta Chief Firearms Office to address all those different kind of investigative avenues. So there are some things tabled and there's things being talked about what is required to purchase different parts of firearms. So right now you do not need a possession and acquisition license to purchase some of those parts. Some of them you do, and each store is on their own accord to address different pieces that they want to protect their own integrity of their own store, to maybe require them to have that license or at least show it. So we're working with the province, and the province is working with the federal government around some of those regulatory type things about purchasing different parts.
Can you confirm if the 2 people arrested are known to police? Like, do they have any prior history with police?
The 2 individuals arrested on this operation are known to police with previous incidences with police, yes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just to follow up on Bill's question. So how much, you said this was $2,000 to $5,000 to get one of these. How much is like a gun with any serial numbers or a clean gun on the street in comparison to these guns?
I think we just described are these guns, essentially, right? So it's such a wide range. It's hard to, like I say, in the 2.5 years we've been doing this, almost 3, I've seen a range in a vast price. So unfortunately, I can't comment on it directly.
Would it be easier or more attainable at this price range than it would a different, like, full metal gun that's been, I don't know, the serial numbers shaved off?
No, there'd be no difference between a ghost gun and an altered serial number on another firearm. It depends obviously on the buyer and the seller and what kind of groups they're selling in and what their needs for it are as well.